Hi everyone, welcome to our virtual briefing by Ahead Labs entitled Where Service Management and Security Converge, and of course what it means for you. My name is Tom Pullman, I'll be your MC, but I'll also quickly turn it over to our subject matter experts. So let me start by introducing those two gentlemen to you. Our topic today involves some intersections, one between security and the broader umbrella of governance, risk, and compliance, and the other intersection between both those disciplines and enterprise service management, specifically the ServiceNow platform. So we're pleased to have two experts, each representing a different part of that story to lead our discussion today. First, we're joined by Stephen Aiello, who's a principal in our security and compliance practice, and then Lucky Johnson, who is a senior technical architect in Ahead's ESM practice and a former consultant with ServiceNow. So the agenda that these two guys will cover today includes the following. First off, some level sets on GRC and the topic of security and SecOps, so that we're all on the same page from the start. Then these guys will discuss the importance of understanding the concepts of both risk and process. That this is not a story of product nearly as much as it is the story of process and risk management. And finally, they'll discuss where and how enterprise service management and ServiceNow fit in, and the important role that it can play in managing both risk and security operations. And as part of that discussion, Stephen will take you through a relevant example of work we did for a large U.S. hospital system in the southeastern U.S. Then we'll wrap it up with Q&A. So speaking of Q&A and some logistical items, as a participant, your microphones are muted just to make sure that everyone can hear okay. So to ask questions, please use the Q&A tab, not the chat tab, but the Q&A tab in the upper right corner of your WebEx screen. That way, I can summarize and ask questions at the end. And we are recording this briefing, so if you have to drop off early or, either way, we'll share the link to that recording post-event. Sound good? So without further delay, let me turn it over to Lucky to start.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. Well, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, depending on where you're at. I just wanted to kind of give a quick outline of, GRC as a whole, and what is GRC at a high level. I don't expect this to be a GRC discussion in depth or anything like that, but I just want to give a, kind of set the plane, if you will. GRC itself, if you think of governance, right, that's essentially the people steering the ship. Hence the little icon up there. Right? They're the ones creating the strategies, defining the policies, knowing what risks the organization is going to, basically have presented to them as they start executing their business. So that being said, knowing what to have in place to help ensure that that does smooth flow through, right? With regard to that, you also have risk management. They're going to take those identified risks and those policies and procedures, and they're going to look at that information and see how those risks basically impact the business. They're going to assess those risks and report on it so that proper governance can take that information and go through the cycle and reiterate whatever, or change whatever needs to be actually modified so they can continue the business. And then finally, the compliance side of it. That's making sure that all those rules and regulations that we all have to have in life are out there, and making sure that we know where they map. Do we have the proper controls as required? Do we know where those controls need to be? And thinking about, data privacy laws and so on and so forth, those are specific items that, really start playing into this from a security posture perspective, because those are going to impact everybody across the world now, especially with the globalization of data. And then I'll hand it over to Stephen to let him do his part.
Sure. So SecOps might be a little bit more of an abstract concept. But what I did just for the purpose of this webinar is I went to Amazon's website and I looked up what's DevOps, because most people understand and they know what DevOps is, or their companies are trying to implement some sort of DevOps culture, or they've heard about Netflix or something like that, companies that have made DevOps very prevalent in the IT community today. And so what I did here with this definition is I sort of just removed the word DevOps and replaced SecOps and changed some of the key words, because the concepts are very similar, right? If you listen to any DevOps practitioners, it's not about a specific set of tools. It's not, about the programming language that you're using. It's a philosophy of how the organization should run and how the development team and the operations team should work together. And so SecOps is very, very similar. It is the combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools that increases the organization's ability to deliver security and services at a high velocity. Now, I'm going to pause there because that might be a new thought. If you are familiar or if you have worked with your security team, you might stop and say, yeah, security delivering anything at a high velocity is wishful thinking. But I would challenge that, and if you have this sort of paradigm shift in thinking on how the security and operations team in the business should work together, then you really can improve the organization's security posture and deliver things at a faster pace, which is ultimately what the business wants. And all of this, of course, is in contrast to the traditional, security and infrastructure management process that we've all been living through for, the last 15 to 20 years. If you've worked in a large organization and you've been on a security team, or if you've been, responsible for compliance, generally the security team is sort of affectionately referred to as the party of no, because they want to tell everybody no, they can't do that. And the security team is sort of the enforcement arm of compliance. But when you look at the results that organizations have had with implementing DevOps and how much faster they can bring their products and services to market, this concept of SecOps follows that same paradigm. And it's been an old security saying for many years that if you build security into the product and the process that you're going to deliver to your customer up front, you will, A, have a much better product delivered to your customer, that the cycle times will be much faster because you can catch processes that are maybe deficient or products that are deficient earlier in the product development cycle, and it will be more cost effective. Instead of having, a software development team or an R&D team, whatever it may be, create a product and push it to the end of that product lifecycle phase, and then have to have that security team come in after the fact and say, oh, well, this doesn't meet a certain regulation, we need this type of encryption, we need this type of hardening standards on our devices, and then have to go back and do all that rework. So SecOps is a fundamental change in a collaborative way of how security teams should interact and should interface within the organizations that they serve. Because ultimately, the organization is the customer of the security team, and they should be treated as such.
Thanks, Stephen. So that's the definitional piece around GRC and SecOps. So now let's talk about the importance of two key terms here, risk and process. And over to you, Lucky.
So, one thing, especially in the case of security operations, you think about what is risk, and understanding what that risk is a key component of the organization. So, what are my assets? Having that identified and knowing what those assets are is a key requirement, because that's your starting point. You have to know what's in your organization that means something to you and the value of those assets. And then taking that and associating it then to what could potentially happen. Now, understanding that intersection and then knowing what the vulnerability, if somebody actually does something, or what is the potential not only of the concern, but how could it break down? There's a couple of different ways you can look at that from if you think of a location, like an office location, or a data asset, a database. The threat that somebody may want to compromise that specific database to get the data inside. Well, what's the vulnerability? I may have a patch that needs to be applied because that patch can be exploited, or maybe it's sitting in an unsecure network. Those are things that would have to be evaluated as part of this assessment. And that intersection, as you see in that the diagram, that's that red dot, right? That's where you really see what the true risk is. And the higher that asset value, the bigger that dot's going to be. And taking that into account and actually reflecting that back to the specific areas within your business associated to, like, such as a business service, or what the level of the business asset is, or the level of value associated to the data. A lot of organizations now are trying to assess risk now with in accordance to GDPR because of, international relations, or, just keeping how that may actually impact their business, even though they may not necessarily be GDPR relevant. Thinking of an example that I was talking to, if, somebody from the EU comes into the U.S. and they go and they visit a hospital, for example, because they didn't feel good, that hospital could potentially become relevant for GDPR. And helping them to understand where those items fall and how they would have to mandate and put the risk around that whole scenario, that's a key thing for them to now do, because they're going to have to start reporting back on those items as well. So, one thing I like to think about here is if you look at the picture, and Steve, I want to make this interactive with you. So if you look at that picture, what are the risks you see? I mean, what are you looking at there, right?
Well, I mean, I'm from Michigan and you're from Chicago, so to me, this seems like an accident waiting to happen in our icy weather in the winter.
Yep.
That's what that looks like to me.
Right, so, I mean, you have several things. You could slide off the road, right? You can you can have a blowout while you're driving down the highway. What does that impact? Well, you can get in a car accident. You can flip over your car. You can get injured in the car. There's a lot of different things. You can damage your car and have to total it, and now you have to go pay the bank. There's a lot of different things that could occur, right?
Absolutely.
And the thing that the problem is everybody, when they start evaluating risks, and I see this quite often in the industry, is they're looking at, okay, I have to fix that problem. But you have to look at the whole picture, because,
that just looks more like a good time now.
Right, exactly. I never said that tire was attached to a car, right? So,
that's true.
You just take your assumptions and you have to really think about what that is and how it's really going to impact you. Don't just make assumptions based on what you see. Evaluate what it really is and go into depth. Spend some time so that you can really assess that risk and see how it's going to impact your organization. See what asset it really is and how that asset impacts other areas of business. And knowing that, and that's going to give you more relevance to help create your impact levels and your levels of significance. The likelihoods may actually go up and down as well, right? Because, I mean, at the basic level, I mean, what we're trying to do here is just say, all right, what is the asset value and what is the significance of this, or the likelihood of the occurrence? Risk management 101, but unless you understand what it is that, or properly identify what it is you need to look at to assess that risk, you're kind of altering the process a little bit. I use an example here, and in this particular example, everybody has to buy a car. Risk management has been around forever. People don't really think about it, but it applies to everything we do in our lives. If you think about what a risk is when you buy a car, when you actually go and you look at buying a car, well, you see if that car is going to fit for you, but you have to go get a loan for the car. So now I've got to take out that financial impact for myself. So how much do I want to put as a down payment? Well, what's going to happen after I do that? Now I've signed the thing and I'm driving out of the lot. What are the risks of occurrence for that? Well, I can get in a car accident. I can, the car could be stolen. I still got to pay the bank back, right? What do I need to do there? And then those are the risks. What are the compliance requirements? Well, I got to have a registration. I got to have a driver's license. I got to have insurance. And how do I mitigate some of those risks? Well, I buy insurance. I put a car alarm on. The level of exposure, for example, when I buy the insurance, maybe do I buy liability or do I do full coverage? Well, depending if you got a loan, you're probably doing full coverage because it's going to require it. But what level of full coverage? Do I do the minimum or do I do more so I can cover myself? And then you start assessing other points that are going to start impacting that. So you truly, everybody actually has some component of risk management in their life that they're going to deal with. And every time you step outside the door, you're evaluating what you're going to do, where you're going to go. Those are all different avenues that you can look at how risk applies to us. But I wanted to show this as an example because it actually gives people the ability to see a real-world example that everybody can sit in. It's not specific to one different item. So, a couple challenges that are out there related to GRC. The first one is, well, I got to go prove that this is actually working, and can you help me do that? Well, audit's going to come in. I saw an E&Y study, and they said that every control that's out there takes around, 10 hours of testing and, 5 hours of maintenance and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, when you have thousands of controls, that number starts getting pretty large. And just being able to get that data out of the right places at the right time, for the right reasons, it's not always easy. A lot of processes that are out there as well are just kind of the same process, but just being executed by a different group. Streamlining those processes so that everybody's using the same data model, everybody's using that same process, so you have the same control and you can measure it once and apply it across the board. Those are another items, another area where we have problems. And then finally, inadequate controls. So instead of identifying the true key controls that we need to look at for the process and knowing what those controls are and how they're going to impact the process, and not just putting out controls just for the sake of having a control in place so I can measure it. What is the validity of that control? You know, does it really do or mitigate the risk that I'm trying to, you know, to show here? And those are some specific items that we need to look at. Not only that, we're going to wind up coming up with noise because those controls may be failing because they're not properly, they're not in the right spot. So understanding those different processes and how those controls impact each other and procedurally doing that from a security perspective is going to give you at the end of that the ability to provide that assurance to show that, hey, here's my compliance, here's how I'm doing, I can show that this is actually working in the process, and we're good to go.
And I think that's a really good tie-in to one of my favorite security quotes. So I'm a big Bruce Schneier fan. For those of you who are into security, you probably know who he is. And Bruce Schneier has this great quote that says, security is a process, not a product. And so when you think about security from that lens, it really is the extension of that risk process within the business. Your traditional InfoSec security teams shouldn't really be dictating risk levels within the organization. You know, they might talk about cyber risk or the risk presented by certain technical vulnerabilities, but risk to the business and the organization should be derived from business value, as Lucky made mention. And in fact, there's this whole process that you can go through called a business impact analysis, depending on, you know, if a system goes down for X amount of minutes or hours or days, you know, how much potential revenue would be lost from the business, or what would the brand damage be, things like that. But to highlight why process is so important, you know, the Equifax breach happened pretty recently, and I'm sharing this sort of anecdotally. And just maybe a week or two ago, somebody had reported to Equifax that my address was incorrect. It was a place that I had lived two residences ago. And so I called up Equifax and I tried to get this issue corrected. And, you know, of course, I put a freeze in my credit and all this sort of thing when the Equifax breach happened. And so, you know, as I was going through and working with their security team and not really getting great results, I said, well, how do I change this? And they said, well, all you have to do is you either have to fax us or mail us a document requesting that we change your address. And I said, well, how do you validate that the user who sent that fax or who sent that email, or I'm sorry, the traditional mail, is who they say they are? Faxes are, you know, unauthenticated. So any of the malicious actors that who stole our personal information to begin with could be sending these unauthenticated forms of communication. And they said, well, you know, that's just our process. That was the answer. So I was escalated to a senior manager, and you know, she reiterated the process. And I said, so let me ask you a question. How do I recover my PIN, my credit freeze PIN, if I lose it? What happens? And she said, oh, well, we just mail you a new one in the traditional U.S. mail. And I said, don't you see a problem with that process? Right? So, you know, everybody went through and they probably got their credit monitoring and they put their credit on freeze, hopefully, and yet a non-technical process within one of the largest credit agencies on the face of the planet really undermines the security of every single one of their customers, right? And this is nothing to do with, you know, cybersecurity. This is a pure process problem. And so, you know, I tell this story because I want to highlight how important it is. It doesn't matter how many technical controls, you know, how much two-factor authentication that we may have or whatever it may be. If the underlying processes are not solid, we still have a risk to the organization. And what we see too much within the community, the InfoSec community, is that that tools sometimes dictate strategy, and they shouldn't, right? Strategy should dictate tools. And the reason why I personally believe that this happens is because when you look at how the industry operates, right, when you look at how your security employees are compensated, or how businesses generally look at certain things, if you buy a firewall, you have this device. You paid for it, it's sitting there, and it's supposed to be doing something. Or if your security analyst knows a tool, you've sent him to some training, that's easy to put on a resume, right? And that security analyst can say, I know Qualys and Nessus and Splunk and all of these great tools. But really what needs to happen in order to bring about this SecOps sort of culture and this improvement of security in being able to mitigate, manage, respond to the risks that the business is identifying is really a more critical thinking process and developing solid processes, unlike the one that Equifax has. So if we move on to the next slide, we can give some examples of this. So when you look at, one of the very, very first things, anybody that has a military background, right, the military is great about data classification. There's whole classification systems, Bella Padula and Strong Star, and all of these certain things that the military has put into place, and it's so fundamental, right? The closer that you can get your security to the sensitive data, that will be more effective. And yet we see almost entirely in the commercial space I've actually never run across any company that has a strong data classification program. Now, I think this will absolutely change with GDPR, because when you read the requirements of GDPR, if you've read the document, it's written very much in legal speak, and basically there are certain aspects, right to be forgotten, transfer of data, that will simply require a better understanding of the data that businesses hold. And so for me, although GDPR will probably be very, very expensive and costly for organizations to implement, the outcome of that will hopefully be a better security process within the organization, simply because companies understand their data better. When we look at, a very simple task that organizations have, like process or patch management, when you look at the risk, most companies today are patching within 30 to 90 days, which is significantly better than what it used to be, but there's a significant amount of risk outside the operating system. So again, just to pick on Equifax a little bit, because it's so fresh in everybody's mind, I look at what happened with them, and when their CEO went in front of Congress to testify what happened, I think the biggest mistake that happened in that whole chain of events was that the CEO stated that somebody forgot to send an email and therefore their process broke down. Again, that's just indicative of a poor process. And so it doesn't matter how many mitigating controls, right? Maybe you have a web application firewall. Most WAFs would have stopped that particular vulnerability, or you do two-factor authentication, whatever it may be. But those are just tools. Remember, having a solid strategy and solid processes should always be where we lead from, and how we select what technical controls that we are going to choose to implement. So if we move on to the next section, we're going to get this story about a customer that we've helped. But Lucky, I wanted to sort of pass it back to you for a quick minute. We've spoken sort of holistically about what GRC and SecOps are from a big picture perspective, but why don't you give us the quick rundown of what the GRC and SecOps modules are within ServiceNow? And we're going mildly off the script, but I think it's important to help our listeners understand that there's GRC and SecOps in a general context, and then there's GRC and SecOps as it pertains to a specific partner that AHEAD is working with.
Absolutely. So, and within the GRC application on the ServiceNow platform, there are 3 core applications that come with the GRC module. Of that, you're going to have a policy and compliance application, which is, a pretty good way to show, here are my policies. I want to map some controls to those policies, and I want to measure those controls in different areas. Being able to get a holistic report around that. Manage the life cycle of those items, the attestations. All of that is done through the service management application suite. Additionally, as part of the GRC offering, one of the great new feature that ServiceNow came out with was vendor risk management, and tying that back into the GRC module. And that gives you the ability to send out questionnaires to your external vendors, get responses back, track that process, monitor that process. And having lived in that process as part of my career, it is a very manual, task-oriented function that data just consistently gets lost, or it's usually a high turnover as well, so people are taking data or they don't know where the process was when they left. There's not a lot of insight or knowledge transfer, I should say, either. So that was another application. And being able to tie those items, specifically from a vendor perspective, directly back into your internal controls, because at the end of the day, you can outsource the process, but you can't outsource all of the risk. You can transfer some of it, but you can't get rid of it. And, the example I like to use for that is if you think of multi-factor authentication, I can have an internal control that says, hey, my multi-factor authentication needs to be applied through all of my vendors. And I send out my questionnaires. If one of those vendors answers that questionnaire that they don't have it, I have a way to track that control issue internally and also have it as a vendor concern so that I can work with the vendor to get that process corrected, but also see that I have an internal compliance issue as well. And then on top of that, tying it back to security operations. So I can see from a business service perspective, or whatever I've defined as part of my assets within the ServiceNow platform, whether that's a service or a location or whatever asset database or data type that I've determined, I can see what, if there's specific incidents or security incidents that may be occurring in my environment, or if I'm being attacked from, I have a campaign against me, I can note those items within the ServiceNow tool to actually capture that with the security incident response function of security incident, and then be able to say, hey, this is actually going to impact this, and I can look at that and actually have that impact my risk. Or think of vulnerability, which is another application in the security operations module that allows the ability to go out and track all of the vulnerabilities in my environment, and then actually help me to manage the task of getting them patched and properly remediated, or at least getting them so that I can monitor and manage them so that if I have to risk accept them, I know where they are, and I can actually have those items impact my risk as well. A lot of people say, oh, I can just accept that risk, or I can accept that risk for that particular vulnerability. But they may be missing the commutative version of that, or commutative version of that, where it actually rolls up and says, hey, you know what, you accepted one and you accepted one, and 3 more over there got accepted, I got a total of 5. My risk is a lot different now than just having 1. And taking that look at that level and seeing that. And I'll go through and I'll show a couple of dashboards later on in the presentation as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Lucky. Okay, so we'll move on to the work that we've done with a pretty large healthcare organization on the East Coast. So to give you a summary of their pain points, they had purchased a very, very large infrastructure, or made a large infrastructure investment in order to reduce downtime. This particular customer, they were having multi-day outages on their Epic platform. And if you're not familiar with Epic, it's a suite of integrated applications with pretty complex data relationships, specifically for healthcare companies. And so what they realized very quickly is that, while they had some technical debt and, technology could solve part of their problems, it was operational issues, right, and the human issues that were causing a large portion of their outages. So the CIO needed to have certain controls in place in order to cut these events sort of off at the knees, and with proof. If we're going to have change control, how are we doing it, and how are we proving that we're doing it? And then when there were issues, right, they had 200 support analysts that were trying to route these tickets for the Epic application, and because the data relationships were so complicated, it was very hard for the analyst, the support analyst, just to get the ticket to the right team in order to even begin resolving the issue. So for them, knowledge management was very, very important. So, when they had an incident the first time, they could categorize it, they could document it, they could, document who it should go to so that issue could be remediated much more quickly. Then they also had FSMA and FERPA compliance that they needed to abide by, and they were bringing on HITRUST as another compliance framework for solutions they were working on. So they needed to be able to do all of this. So there were some questions that, when we went in, that we were trying to answer for the customer. A, how do we stop these outages, right? How do we create, enforce, and prove out that our processes are working to stop, the human error in the environment? How do we enable knowledge management, right? How do we get more knowledge out of our employees' heads and into some sort of knowledge management systems? And then how do we achieve these compliance requirements? And for those of you that have lived through compliance, it's painful. Similar to Lucky, I spent about a half a decade at a former employee being a liaison for KPMG in Deloitte & Touche, and the amount of just sheer documentation you have to do if you're doing it with Word and Excel, it can just be overwhelming. So how do you just meet the requirements? And then most importantly, right, a hospital is not in the business of being compliant. A hospital is in the business of providing customers with care, right? So how do we achieve all of this without impacting our level of customer experience, or possibly improve it, right? How do we use process to improve the customer experience? So those were the key questions that we were trying to help this customer answer and have those as outcomes. So, how did we solve this problem? There were two things. There was AHEAD's processes, and then ServiceNow is one of our strategic partners. And what AHEAD brought to the table is, we have great resources, and we have the capability, because we have experts here that understand compliance. When you have multiple compliance frameworks, how do you overlay one on top of another to see sort of the overlapping elements? I have a statement I make: compliance frameworks are just different enough to be frustrating. When you look at a lot of these compliance frameworks, they're very, very similar. One may have you scan every 30 days for vulnerabilities, one may be 45 days, one may have a password policy of 12 characters, one may have a password policy of 15 characters, but in general the policies are pretty aligned. So we worked with the customer to figure out what those policies were. We discovered that a lot of that policy creation, tracking, attestation was a manual process. So they were spending a lot of time and energy just documenting this instead of using some sort of automated system. And I personally cannot stand email. I think it's a more of a time suck. But they were using email to keep track of all of these activities, which is not a good long-term documentation system. So when we decided on the solution, and when we were helping them, we knew from the beginning that there couldn't be any more of these Excel spreadsheets and Word documents. It's not scalable. It's not conducive to a team working together on one single source of truth. And that single source of truth needed to be automated. We couldn't have people spending countless hours. Lucky brought up that statistic of thousands of hours measuring controls, right? That's not a scalable model. So what that pivoted into was AHEAD helping them build out the ServiceNow platform. And what we did for them is we helped build out the CMDB, and if you are a security buff, the CIS critical controls. Control number 1 is an inventory of all authorized and unauthorized hardware on the network, right? And control number 2 is inventory of all authorized and unauthorized software on the network. that is fundamentally a CMDB. So from a security perspective and from a asset perspective, we needed to make sure that they had a very, very solid foundation in their CMDB. Addressing some of those process problems, we help them develop and improve their existing change management process to make sure that, only changes that were approved and had been analyzed for risk and, have specific rollback plans were allowed to go through. And then we implemented the knowledge management module as part of that to make sure that when those events did come up, they were being routed quickly and efficiently to the teams that they needed to be going to. And so the great thing about this is that we could, in some of these cases, automate a lot of this manual work because it has a deep, deep history of automation orchestration. We've been investing in automation orchestration for almost a half a decade, much longer than our peers. And so when we looked at certain technical controls, let's just say we needed to pull a list of users from Active Directory to make sure that it hadn't changed without the change control, those are things that we can automate, therefore reducing that low-hanging fruit manual tasks that a lot of folks need to do manually. And then we were able to make sure that when there was something that needed to be executed, so let's say patching is an example, right? This was implemented within the GRC and security modules. If you had a specific administrator who was responsible for patching, and that administrator said, well, this is going to be too difficult to patch, and as Lucky mentioned, they just accepted that risk. As a continual acceptance of risk built up over on the security side, the cybersecurity side, that visibility was escalated over in the risk and compliance side of the house. So that is, speaks directly to the, what the CEO stated to Congress that, well, somebody forgot to send an email and our patching process broke down. The goal of a good process is that it doesn't break down under stress. That's critical. So then we had very specific dashboarding and task assignment capabilities, and this will have some really great slides on here. This is fantastic for visibility and understanding where you're at a glance. It's sometimes very, very hard to understand where is our security posture at. Where are we at from a compliance perspective? What controls are we meeting? What controls are we not meeting? And then overall, what this gave the customer, it was the ability to respond in real time to the organization's objectives. And so what we can do now is we can start to actually turn over to the ServiceNow application, and Lucky will walk us through a couple of the screenshots that we've developed, and he can sort of give us the information and how it might be used by a CISO or risk and compliance team.
All right, can everybody see the screen? Or can you guys see the screen? I know the attendees can't.
Yeah, we can see it.
We can see it.
So this is something when, having come from ServiceNow, I had a great team there that we really tried to look at personas and how people could leverage the various components of the data. And, one thing that I really wanted to say here is that, we really tried to understand what they would need to have in their day-to-day business, their day-to-day job. And we created a couple of dashboards out there, and a few of these are actually out of the box now items, which is great. And this is using the dashboards functionality of ServiceNow. And they created a CISO dashboard. And on this, what are some of the things that the CISO worries about or thinks about or needs to know about? And a couple of key points, if we look at these holistically, and I'm just going to run through these tabs here. You have security operations. So what's the big point about security operations? Well, security incident is one item of security operations. Knowing what type of incidents you have, how long it's taking to resolve those incidents. I saw a study where we had security incidents, I think it came from Ponyman, where it takes like 200 days to figure out that you actually had an incident, and then another 60 days to try and get it resolved. That's almost a year gone past, or at least 3 quarters, right? 3/4 of a year. And, before you've even tried to remediate the issue. But seeing those items up in front of you, seeing how long it's taking so you can correct your process where necessary, or see how you can alleviate some of the concern. how long is it taking to get certain items done, or what are some of the bottlenecks you're running into? Where are some of those incidents occurring? Looking at it from a geographical perspective versus a time to closure perspective, and just having some of that leading information to help you make just business decisions and what you need to do within your internal area. So this is just a great idea to show some of this information. There is a business tree down here where we actually go through, and it shows you from a business service map how you can actually see where are most of my items occurring. Based on the data in here, you can see that there's a lot of issues around this particular store over here, for an example. Or what if that was a different location or a different business service, depending on what it is that we wanted to look at. Just being able to sort and filter the data, I mean, that's a great function of the ServiceNow platform, because you can take that data and you can slice it and dice it in so many different ways to make that report relevant for who needs to take an action with it or what they need to see out of it. Having that same data available for somebody sitting at the C-suite versus somebody who's sitting at the analyst chair trying to make sure that they have what they need to do or know where they need to go. Great functionality and a robust function. From a vulnerability perspective, same item, you're looking at that vulnerability management application, and you're looking at what type of information is out there as well. What type of vulnerabilities do I have? Steve, this is your favorite item right here, this vulnerability age. How many vulnerabilities do I have in my environment that are just lagging out there? This number, from the last time I went up, of course, it's gone up because I haven't remediated those items. But maybe I want to try and manage my process to get this down to more like a 90-day quarter. What is my patch process? Why is this so far out of sync with my patch requirements? I can actually start tracking those items to controls in my GRC application now. This is where you start to see those two applications start to marry each other and get the benefit of one feeding the other from a security posture perspective so that you can strengthen your overall process and functionality within the organization. And again, just being able to, tie down that information to see what type of vulnerabilities we have, where they're at, so on and so forth. This is pretty cool if you have a multinational organization. It gives you a great idea of, maybe I have a different process over there, maybe I have a different group, maybe I have different policies in place, and maybe I need to accommodate for that. But now I'm at least getting that visualization of what's actually going on in my environment. And then, now tying it back to that GRC side. This is an excellent way to see, here's my GRC focus. These are the controls that I need to have in place to ensure that my environment's up and running properly. And if something breaks, I need to know about it. I need to see it. I need to see where my concerns are. I can look at this particular item over here and say, hey, this is a non-compliant function. I got 111 controls that are failing. Well, is that good or bad? I don't know. Maybe I need to go take a look at that. Or being able to sort on specific items. So if I want to look at a particular business service, for example, I like to pick on my financial accounting system, and I can see just how well that particular item is doing or where they need to be compliant. So if I want to pull up PCI, and just look at the specific PCI items, I can see which ones are failing with relation to just PCI for them, or which ones are passing, or where do I need to draw my attention, what needs to draw my attention that I need to go concentrate on. Perfect example of that.
Just having that level of visibility is amazing.
Absolutely. All right, so let me just close out of that. Now, the one thing that I wanted to go through here as well was, risk management. Every control is essentially to mitigate or reduce some risk at the basic level. And, tying those items back to each other so you can see how those risks are being evaluated. What are the ratings of those risks? Do I have the right risks in my organization, and how am I measuring that? How am I reporting that? And am I reporting it properly and to the right people? So, being able to see what type of information I have out here, I love this diagram because it shows the variation of risks, because everything isn't just an IT risk. If you generalize everything into an IT risk, you lose some of that detail that you may be looking for. Maybe I want to look at the various exposures within a certain risk element, and being able to define those items at a more granular level and being able to report on that information, but then again also seeing how well everybody's doing across the board. Now, with the interactiveness of these particular dashboards, I think this is a great way to show where you can start, again, going into that data. Yeah, I'm getting that graphical representation. This is a perfect example. I have my moderate risks over here, but I can drill into that item specifically and see exactly what's causing that. Why is that? What is the problem here with that item? Right. And if I go back, just one more here. One other item that we put in here is, orchestration. A lot of organizations now are looking to automate to save time and effort so that they can go focus on the more high-value items that they can, get their people working on. Changing a password or patching a system where we can just have a system do that in an automated fashion, or isolating a system. Think about the security perspective. If some system is being attacked, maybe I just put it into an isolated LAN. Or if I have a malware outbreak on that particular group of systems, I can isolate them off the network so they can't propagate that out to the rest of my network. Having those items in place so that you can focus your functionality and get those things pushed off so that they can be dealt with accordingly, but reduce your actual impact to the rest of your organization. And being able to measure that in a dollar in cost savings. Security itself in conjunction with, the orchestration perspective of ServiceNow is a great tool. Think about this from a cloud management perspective. If I have systems spinning up, how long are they sitting out there? People forget about them, don't use them anymore, and it's just sitting in Amazon's web services. Well, that's a security risk, because nobody's looking at that system, nobody's paying attention to it. Why don't I spin that down? I'm reducing my risk automatically, so nobody has to have their time frame associated to it. Or more importantly, what was that system used for? If it was a dev box, it probably wasn't patched to the fullest extent because we're not monitoring at that level. It has a vulnerability. That's a backdoor into my network now. So you can actually put specific controls and see where that can actually save time and effort from a person going out and managing that. In addition to that, you can put a cost next to that. So how much does it actually save you from a cost perspective of saying, if I put that system in AWS and it sits out there because nobody shut it down, I can have orchestration go out and shut it down for me. So not only am I reducing my security risk, increasing my security posture, but I'm also saving money because now I just turn that machine off and it's not costing me any of my AWS services. Steve, anything particular you'd like me to speak to on this dashboard while I have it open?
No, I mean, I think that when we think about the lack of, security talent, right? I mean, we hear all the time that there's just such a shortage of cybersecurity talent within the ecosystem, and you have the ability to, once an organization is mature and they have defined processes and workflows for incident response runbooks, that you can start to then take that and automate that work. A, it's a cost savings. B, it helps the organization from having to find this, security talent for the low-hanging fruit. And then finally, the individuals that they do have, they can be looking for the unknown unknowns, right? And if you're going to pay these high-dollar, high-value individuals to be and work in your organization, you want them to be looking for the things that are not low-hanging fruit. So when I look at this, I think this is really one of the most important slides that we have from a business perspective, and I'm very proud to work it ahead because it ties so nicely in with our rich heritage of automation orchestration. ServiceNow has a great orchestration engine, and so the capabilities that AHEAD has, both in the security compliance and that automation orchestration piece, it all ties together very nicely there.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. So I know there's a few people on the phone that have seen this slide before. Actually, I leveraged this from some of my ServiceNow teammates, and this is a great representation of what most organizations look like. If you look at that item on the left-hand side, there's a lot of disjointed processes, there's a lot of duplicated processes, there's very little communication, little to no oversight, and I guess the way I would say it too, and the one thing that it says at the bottom there is just unnecessary complexity. And the nice thing is this is actually coming from the OCEG. If you look at the way that actually works now and what they call their future state, I mean, that's almost a way of saying, hey, get everything in one place and leverage everything from that one data model and that one data repository. It's almost selling ServiceNow without saying it's selling ServiceNow, because at the end of the day, having your CMDB in place in ServiceNow, knowing what your processes are and having those key items in place so that you can execute accordingly when necessary, and then being able to manage that process and then have oversight into what's actually occurring in your environment because everybody's on the same page is just a key goal for every organization. Not only is it a time saving, it's a cost saving. Even sometimes they look at it from a perspective of an unrealized cost saving because maybe it's somebody not doing something. But I guarantee you, if you start looking at the systems that, you know, every point solution that an organization has in place, these items really start to play a key role.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks, gentlemen. So real quick, I thought I'd wrap up on it with a couple of questions that have come in through the Q&A chat. So a couple of them are on GDPR. So the first one, I think we need some clarification. The question is, won't the GDPR only affect EU organizations? So I'd like you guys to address that first, and then I'll follow up with another one on GDPR.
So, Steve, you want to take a crack at it, or you want me to?
I'll go for it, Lucky.
So GDPR affects any organization that deals with European Union residents. So if you have somebody from the EU and you have their data, you will have a component of that business arm that's going to be required to be under the GDPR. I hope that answers the question. Essentially, okay, at the end of the day, if you think of, yes, the GDPR is focused primarily on businesses in the EU, but if you do business, if you're an organization that does business in the EU, you're going to be part of that, or at least that business division will be, depending on how you've segregated your business and how you've actually aligned to your within your organization for business units versus different corporate structures, but that's a different question. If you're in the EU and you're operating there, it will have an effect.
Okay. Stephen, I think this one also on GDPR is for you, though. Besides data classification, which you mentioned, how do you see GDPR affecting security programs, and what will be required of security teams?
So this will just require a level of understanding about where data lives in, you know, whether it's in a database, whether it's in unstructured format or structured. And today, almost no company that I have spoken with could say, yes, we know that all of this type of data only lives here. And so let me give you an example. One of the requirements for GDPR is that a European citizen has the right to go to a company and say, I no longer want you to have my data, and I want you to transfer my data to this other company. So we'll just use the example of a credit reporting agency like Equifax. So let's say you were a disgruntled customer and you no longer want Equifax to have any of your data whatsoever. You would have the right to call them and say, you need to send my data over to TransUnion because I only want them to be dealing with my credit, and you have to purge everything that you have on me. And that doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't matter if it's an Excel spreadsheet on some, you know, sales representative's laptop. It doesn't matter if it's in a Hadoop cluster because you want to do big data analytics on your customer base. It doesn't matter if it's in a traditional SQL database for, you know, reporting purposes. You know, in that level of visibility, I would say no customer that I've spoken to, no CISO that I've spoken to has that level of visibility. And above and beyond that, they don't even know how they will get there. So what that will mean is that companies will have to, in order to have some sort of semblance of compliance with GDPR, develop classifications for their data and make sure that data lives in certain repositories. Now, how does that affect security teams? You know, I use the analogy of Fort Knox, right? All of our gold is supposed to be in Fort Knox. I've never been there, but I'm pretty sure they're not hiding the gold in random closets. There's one large vault that, you know, is heavily guarded, and every person knows where that vault is. And so how does that relate to a data classification program? when you understand the data that's sensitive, and when you understand the contextual, reasoning why that data is sensitive, you start to make wiser decisions on how you will place it, how you will use it, and how you will protect it. And quite frankly, as a security practitioner, this is not a skill set that most security engineers, analysts have. They're very good at finding anomalies, but at least the ones that I know, they're not great about writing process documents and, things like that. So this is going to be a pretty large shakeup. In most every customer that I've spoken to says, this is like one of the largest things that they've faced from a compliance perspective in decades, going all the way back to, the original SOX compliance. So it will be a mind shift. The security teams will have to think differently. It's not just about buying a different product.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. One last question that came in. It goes back to something you said early on. You were drawing a parallel between SecOps and DevOps. So how can SecOps become something that's more of a practice or practice within an organization as opposed to, just a team or a responsibility? I'm very passionate about security, but the mindset of a lot of security teams will need to change. It will, just like DevOps required and does require the operations team to be much more cooperative and more tightly aligned with the software development team, it will require that security teams are not the party of no, right? They can't run around and just say, you can't do that, you can't do that. They have to be much more entrenched, and instead of saying, no, you can't do that, I would love to see security teams saying, okay, this is your requirement, how do we enable you to do that securely? And I think part of it will be some interpersonal communications training, quite frankly, and part of it will be the attitude that the business is a customer of security and should be treated as such. And then, also there's this mindset, all the big security conferences, right, DEF CON, Black Hat, here in Michigan, we've got GERCON, DerbyCon. All of the glory, if you will, goes to the guys that break things. It goes to the pen testers, it goes to the vulnerability researchers, things like that. And so I think what will have to happen in order for SecOps to become a real live movement is that there has to be a greater importance on security teams building secure solutions with the operations team, with the development team, and I think those are going to be the key things that have to occur in order for SecOps as a practice to really mature and take off. Okay, thanks, Stephen. Guys, I know we're at the top of the hour, but there were some questions coming in from one of our participants. They were going directly to the presenters and not the Q&A, so sorry for missing those. As you were going through some of those dashboards in the ServiceNow example, Lucky, the comment was, looks like a ton of manual input for things like audit finding. Can you elaborate on that?
I guess I'm not really sure what that means by a ton of manual input. I mean, essentially, if where are you starting from? Those data points would be coming in based on what you've already defined and outlined. So, the initial implementation of any GRC or security operations, you're going to have to identify what those items that you want to cause flags are, and those are the items that are going to pop up as part of those, what you consider a finding or a reporting statistic. If you put data into the system because you want to upload past data so that you can start doing some reporting on that data holistically, of course that's going to take time and effort, but it's, again, I would start asking questions around what is the relevance of the data, what is the purpose of the data, where do we need it in? I mean, if you look at performance analytics, one of the functions of ServiceNow gives a great ability to do leading indicators or time frame. So, what if I want to look at a period of time and see what my stats are over that period of time? Having the ability to do that, I'm going to need time to gather data. So manually inputting them, I would say yes and no, depending on what it is. and where it would be relevant. I wouldn't just drop data in the system because. I don't think that would be a good practice.
I think, Lucky, too, it's important to let people know about the built-in integrations that ServiceNow does have. So if you're using, let's say, a vulnerability scanning tool, right? Let's take my favorite metric, vulnerability age in the environment. If you're using a vulnerability scanning tool like Nessus or Qualys or Nexpose, whatever it may be, there are pre-built integrations with a lot of the major players, right, from like a Splunk or, and so when you have that integration, if you were to run your vulnerability scan, that data would be sent into the system. So it's not like you have to take an XML file and import it and then manually massage the data. That's really the power of the automation platform and how you do more with less people.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, thinking of like a list of security incidents, you can have that information coming in from Splunk through an API call as part of that integration. And you can start, based on your own rules that you would set, you can create different types of events, alerts, or incidents, depending on how you want to do it, and actually start segregating and reporting on those different slices of data, if you would.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen, and we're over time, so hopefully as more questions come in, we'll be following up with attendees. So thanks, everyone, for the questions, and thanks especially to you, Stephen and Lucky, for your time and insights. Once again, everyone, we recorded this webinar. We'll be sure to send around a link in our post-event follow-up, and I'd like to leave you with an offer. If you're interested in having a more in-depth briefing on SecOps and GRC and where ServiceNow fits, you've got a few options. One is you can obviously let your account executive know. 2, you can reply to our follow-up email. Or 3, check out our briefings catalog online at thinkahead.com. We'd love to keep the conversation going. So thanks again for attending this virtual briefing, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.